Hello and welcome to our podcast. I'm going to apologize already because my voice is not as good as I would like it to be, but I hope you bear with me and then we can, enjoy this one more episode. And thank you for staying with us once again. I'm Danny, and today, Great.com talks with Casey Brennan, the Conservation Director of Wildsight. If you haven't heard of it yet, Wildsight is a Canadian environmental organization dedicated to conserving biodiversity and promoting sustainable communities in the province of British Columbia. Before I begin, remember if you're new here to this podcast, press subscribe on YouTube or in your podcast app. Hi, Casey, and welcome.
Hi, Danielle. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. Casey, I always like to begin by learning more about the history of the organization. So, can you give us a brief overview of how Wildsight began, how it was founded?
Sure. And brief might be a challenge for me. I like to talk to, I read in your profile that you're a Gemini and you like to talk. So I'm a Cancer and I like to talk. So hopefully we can accommodate each other in terms of time and not talking too much. But yes, Wildsight started many moons ago, over 35 years ago, as the East Kootenay Environmental Society. So the Kootenays is a region in southeastern British Columbia, in the Rockies, in the Columbia Mountains, the Columbia Basin. And it started sort of in a response to a couple of acute issues around pollution from uh, a pulp mill, as well as concerns around forestry practices, clear-cut logging, and potential impacts on water and wildlife. And so, kind of separately at the same time, not exactly at the same time, groups in a number of communities in our region started to organize, self-organize in the late 80s around environmental issues. And pretty soon thereafter started to connect together and decided to form this multi-member society that has separate branches in each of our communities, in each of our regions. So we have 6 separate branches, and then we have a regional organization that I work for that has charitable status and works to uh, as you said, protect wildlife and wild spaces, and at the same time educate the communities in our region and school age children and all the way through their lifelong learning, and then also to work on sustainable communities. And that last part is very much tends to be the work of the branches, the individual community-based branches. And the regional organization focuses more on that large landscape scale, watershed, water quality, water protection, pollution, at a larger scale issue, forestry issues, mining issues, and those kind of things, recreation, industrial recreation, large scale recreation issues, access issues. And so in the early aughts, in 2004, the East Kootenay Environmental Society went through a rebranding process. We actually worked with Unilever, a very large corporation, global corporation that makes everything from, uh, you know, uh, Ben and Jerry's ice cream to Dove soap kind of thing, right? A very large consumer-based, consumer organization. And they've got a lot of branding experts. And so they helped us. And we went through a rebranding process in 2005, 2004, and became Wildsight. And all of our branches eventually adopted that new name and that new brand. And we've been rolling strongly ever since for the last 20 years with that. And actually just had our annual general meeting last weekend where we had a branding session and sort of had a conversation about, what is our brand, what's our elevator pitch, all of those kind of things with the board and the staff and some other members. And people were very pleased with, how strong the brand is and how, well the brand has served our work over the last 20 years.
Thank you for sharing all of this, Casey. I think I loved when you mentioned the visions that you have because it's a lot of ground to cover, right? So making the separations sounds vital, I would say, to move forward. And one other thing that you kind of briefly covered when you mentioned the early days, right, were
Mm.
some of the challenges that you faced. But right now, just to give our listeners some context, what are some of the biggest environmental challenges that British Columbia is facing right now, and how are you trying to address them somehow?
Sure. Yeah. So as I mentioned, we work on forestry and mining and many other issues at scale. And I should say that we are focused as an organization on the Rockies and the Columbia Mountains, the Columbia Basin region. It's an area the size of Switzerland, so it's plenty big. But a lot of the work that we do has provincial and even national or international implications. So we work on policy at that British Columbia scale, British Columbia level. In Canada, excuse me, in Canada, resource management, resource protection, development is governed at the provincial level mostly. Energy development, mining, forestry, those are all regulated by provincial legislation. So that's been largely the level of government that we've focused on. And forestry is a really big challenge for us at the moment. Your listeners and viewers may not realize this, but British Columbia enjoys an international reputation as a very beautiful place full of nature, and even in the marketing, the tourism marketing, the tagline is supernatural British Columbia. And but the unfortunate reality is that old growth logging continues in British Columbia. Um, Tens of thousands of hectares a year are cleared of old growth. Some as old as 1,000-year-old or more trees are continue to be cut down. We have less than 3% by some estimates, and in some endangered ecosystems, less than 1% of the original intact ecosystem that was there sort of prior to European colonialization and industrial development. And we are very strongly with many allies, including indigenous communities, calling for the end of all old growth logging in our province, and it's something that we're working very hard on, not only for the sorry, excuse me, for the importance to biodiversity, but also for the importance to climate change and carbon storage. We know that intact old growth forests store more carbon per hectare than any other kind of ecosystem, if it's temperate or tropical, depending on the latitude that you're at. And so the false claims by the forestry industry that planting trees and we can plant our way out of the carbon crisis is completely false. Not to mention the incredible destruction that clearing these ecosystems, these endangered ecosystems, wreaks on the biodiversity crisis that we are deep into at a global scale. So that's one of the biggest issues that we work on. Of a major concern is mining, and particularly here in the valley that I live in, the Elk Valley, in the very southeast corner of British Columbia, we have four giant open pit metallurgical coal mines. So it's coal that's used to make steel. So it's a higher value product. It still has an incredible carbon footprint, but unfortunately, it also has an incredible water pollution footprint. We have a selenium contamination crisis in our watershed, and levels of selenium that are in some cases 40 times higher than the guidelines from the British Columbia government. They've been given special dispensation through special regulatory process that allows them to continue to operate, even though they are well over the guidelines. But even well downstream at the confluence with the major river that our small Elk River or smaller Elk River drains into, we're still at more than, in some cases, double the recommended level for safety for aquatic life in the watershed. So that is a huge crisis that we're working on and very active on. And then another issue that's very important to us that I mentioned already is around recreation and access management, and not just in the sort of the highways and the front country, as it's called here, on paved roads, but on the gravel roads or the forestry roads, the backcountry roads, and the motorized use of those backcountry roads, not just for recreation, but also for industry, but but more so for recreation. And we know from multiple studies, reviews of impacts of motorized access, it has a huge negative impact on wide-ranging mammals, particularly grizzly bears, other, important species that will just avoid areas where humans are using motorized vehicles, everything from trucks to quads to side by sides to snowmobiles in the wintertime as well. And so we're trying to reduce that human activity, motorized activity on the land in order to make space for nature.
I love that you brought all of those aspects because I think so often we, and I include myself in this, we think about conservation, and environment and all of those climate issues that we are facing in terms of the big things, right? Big companies, big industries, and of course, they have a huge role on it. But sometimes it's easy to forget how the development of a society in the small steps and the small things also affects the ecosystems that we live on or live nearby, right?
Mhm.
And this kind of brings me to another thing that Whitesight's not just involved or concerned with preservation, right? You
Mhm.
also try to work on education on an education level and creating sustainable communities. So let's talk first about the education efforts that you work on also, right? Do you collaborate with schools? How does that work? I'm really interested in learning your approach to it.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a very comprehensive education program. It's a huge part of what we do. It's over a third of our annual budget. We have been able to take over 100,000 kids over more than just over the past 20 years outside to connect them with nature through curriculum approved school programs. So we work with the BC Ministry of Education and local school districts to develop appropriate curriculum for the appropriate grades. And we have programs from kindergarten to grade 12, and we even have programs that engage youth post-secondary as well. Field programs in the summertime, youth leadership programs as well. So we've been doing this for, as I said, for over 2 decades. Uh, Everything from a winter wonder program from kindergarten to grade 3, where students go out in the middle of winter and learn about animal tracks and learn about all of the activity that is still going on in nature, even under the cover of snow, or even when you wouldn't think that nature is still thriving and surviving, and through to a program for that's specifically designed that fits perfectly with the curriculum in grade 6. It's called Beyond Recycling, where students learn about consumption and waste, and that they go to the local landfill and see how the waste stream from their businesses and from residential houses goes, and how it's dealt with and where it goes after that. And they learn about the system, and then think about how can we reduce waste? How can we consume in different ways? How can we reuse things and get beyond the lowest R on this, on the 3 R's or the 5 R's or even the 7 R's some people talk about, and get to reuse and reduce and all of those kind of things. And then through to programs at the high school level that are, very science-based, and look at watersheds and water quality and how the water system works, and learning about where their domestic water supply comes from, and what impacts water quality, both coming in and leaving different buildings and places that humans use. And so that's all been wonderful and very successful. And then more recently, in the last 5 years, less than 5 years, this will be the fourth year, we've developed a youth climate core program where youth are able to do hands-on projects skill building projects, jobs, for pay on climate adaptation and climate mitigation projects. And this has been deployed in a number of communities, and we're very excited that the provincial government in their recent budget announced some major funding, significant funding for projects like this. And we're looking forward to being able to expand this program for youth under 30 to have people be able to engage in meaningful work that makes them feel like they're doing something to make a difference towards the climate crisis, because we know there's a lot of climate anxiety out there, and a lot of youth are suffering from this sense of helplessness and this sense of overwhelm. So we're offering practical based programs that can make a difference for folks.
I'm going to use your words, Casey, and say this is all wonderful, especially this last initiative. I think it does speak to this new generation, and the fact that this is a paid opportunity. I think it also talks about, thinking of it as a social possibility as well, economic possibility as well. You can do it as a career. You can, get paid to do something that is so great. So it's really incredible. Now, talking about that second aspect, the community,
Yeah.
I think this is something that you even mentioned in your first answer when talking about history and these divisions, right? About having
Mhm.
community-centered care somehow. Uh,
Mhm.
I keep thinking here about this community engagement, the importance of it, not just in the conservation work, thinking about preserving and what we already have, but also thinking about moving forward. So how does Wildsight involve local communities in its projects? How do you actually able to promote this concept of sustainable communities? And if I may add something here,
Mhm.
talking about indigenous communities,
Mhm.
how do they get into this picture? How do they work with you uh, in a in a day-to-day basis? In a practical sense of things.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. And there's so many ways. What the wonderful thing about the structure that we have with these semi-autonomous branches, that there are their own separate societies, have their own boards, have their own strategic plans and goals and priorities, is that we have this incredible diversity of expressions of that are unique to each community in terms of what they are focused on, what they care about. So here in the community that I live in the Elk Valley, we have very much a group of people who have sort of taken the idea of food security and food sustainability and just run with it. And so, Wildsight Elk Valley branch has been running a store called Local, which is a low barrier of entry model for local food producers to be able to sell their products directly to customers. So we have produce, we have locally raised meat, frozen meat that's available. We have locally produced prepared meals that are available, and we also have locally produced, shelf stable preserves, dried goods, teas, all sorts of, chocolate, all sorts of different things that are, not necessarily all harvested here locally, but are sustainably, ethically sourced products that are value added here in the region, and help contribute to the local food ecosystem. And we've returned over $500,000 of benefits to local food producers in just over 3 years now. And then something very exciting, we will be landing a food production container, a hydroponic growing operation in less than a month here, by the end of this month, that will start producing locally year-round greens in a hydroponic container farm operation. So that's another social enterprise. And these are being run as social enterprises. So any profits are being put back into the community. And, we've been able to partner with local community organizations on the local store to provide gift cards to people who have economic challenges that wouldn't necessarily be able to access the food in the store. And we will be working with schools and the food banks with with the Evergreens farm to provide locally produced fresh greens to people in our valley. And so that's just the Elk Valley. Then you've got I'll go to Invermere, which is another community that has a branch that they're super focused on climate change, and they've got a local electric vehicle car share program that they've been running, and they've been working on a climate strategy for their community that they've been very deeply involved with, along with other initiatives there. And then I'll go to Revelstoke, which is another one of our branch communities, and they have been very focused on wildlife and creating a toad and turtle crossing structures to go underneath a highway where there was high toad and turtle mortality for traveling to a breeding area from like a habitat area. And so they've got cameras out that remote sensing cameras that monitor, and they put in culverts under the highway and with fencing, little like low fencing, because you don't have to have high fencing for turtles and toads, and that directs them into these culverts. And and we've got Creston, for example, sponsors a bird festival. So they've had this wildly successful bird festival where hundreds of people come in every spring, and they go out and they provide interpretive programs, but they also monitor migratory birds coming through, and they've been very successful in putting together sort of migratory bird counts to assess population health and the very important wetland area there that they have in the Creston Valley. And then in Golden, speaking of wetlands, we have the Columbia Valley wetland, which is the largest intact wetland in North America and is designated as a Ramsar site, which is international designation for under the UN convention, the Ramsar Convention for internationally significant wetlands areas. And so the Golden Branch is very connected to their wetland, and they've put in breeding boxes for different birds and a viewing platform for people at a local recreation area, so that they can go and not be disturbing birds. They're kind of behind a blind, in a viewing platform. And they provide interpretive programs and also are producing science about the health of the wetland and the health of certain species in the wetland. So it's really, it's a huge variety. And then to answer your final point around connection with indigenous communities and how do we help empower indigenous communities, we're very proud of the long partnership and work together with the Tanakh Nation. And I was remiss in saying to start with that we live, work, and play in the traditional unceded territory of the Tanakh Nation. That's Tanakh Amakis is the language, the way that they speak about their lands, and working to stop a very potentially destructive ski hill development proposal called Jumbo Glacier Resort. We worked for over 3 decades to oppose this. And we worked in partnership with the Tanakh Nation, and I'm very pleased that an indigenous protected and conserved area called Gatmuk, which is their Tanakh word for where the grizzly bear spirit goes to dance. And so there will be they are now in the process of working with the provincial and federal governments to determine the boundaries and the management plan for the Gatmuk Indigenous Protected and Conserved Area. So that's one example of the partnership work that we've done with local Indigenous communities to help protect and conserve areas. We've also supported them with solar projects and with forest controlled burning projects, so to mitigate climate change and risk of wildfire. And we've also worked with indigenous communities on water and water pollution issues, water conservation issues. The Columbia River Treaty is a treaty that's between the Canada and the U.S. And we're playing a small role, but playing an important role in making sure that Indigenous communities, Indigenous voices are centered in the renegotiation process for that.
This is really amazing work, Casey. Really, 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 all aspects of it. Really, it's kind of astonishing, I gotta say. And the autonomy, the independence that these communities also have, as you were mentioning, it's really something I would say to really look up to. I think you have a good model going on there, so other organizations could really take a look at it. And guys, to everyone listening, as usual, we unfortunately only have time to cover, some of the work that Wildsight is doing. So I strongly advise you to go to their page, which is wildsight.ca. You can get more information. You get to see the beauties that we are talking about here, and you find ways to get in touch with them. Because Casey, this is my next question to you. For
Mhm.
everyone listening or watching us right now that got inspired and would like to get involved with you, what are the best ways to get in touch and help you out keep going?
Yeah, I appreciate that. And, of course, we're on social media, and you can check us out there. Wild Insight is usually our at, if you search that on your favorite social media apps. I would just say we're upping our TikTok game slowly. We're not really super active on TikTok, but, Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn are strong for us. But yeah, you can go to Wildsight, WILDSIGHT, all one word .ca and click through there. You can donate. We very much appreciate all donations. If you're in Canada, you can get a charitable receipt for that donation. But even internationally, we enjoy donations from I wouldn't say all over the world, but certainly we get donations from Europe, and we have actually gotten a few donations from South America, not Brazil that I know of. I know we've gotten donations from Colombia, just because we have some folks that we're connected with there that value our work. But yeah, and I'll just kind of make a real quick pitch for why you might want to donate if you don't live right around here. Wildsight, the area we work in, is right in the heart of the largest remaining intact wildlife corridor in the world. So the Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative is the first large scale, landscape scale wildlife corridor protection initiative. And Wildsight work is in the very center of that, right in smack in the middle of it. And the I this is an idea has now spawned multiple other initiatives globally for large landscape scale protection, and it's sort of based conservation biology 101. It's what the science of protecting biodiversity says we need in order to protect and maintain healthy populations on the landscape. That we can't have, you know, island populations, and island being like isolated, surrounded by human development populations in protected areas that become cut off or unconnected from other populations of wildlife, because what happens is they become susceptible to inbreeding and then to disease or other natural disturbances, fires, floods, wind events, and you can lose these populations. And what science has shown over time, for example, with grizzly bears, which used to roam from as far east as Winnipeg, Lake Winnipeg, Manitoba, and British Columbia, all through the lower 48 in the west, down through to Mexico. Now, there's a grizzly bear on the state flag of California. The last grizzly bear was seen there in 1954. Um, these island populations that were dotted along the Cordillera, the Western Cordillera of North America, have all disappeared except for in that Yellowstone area, which is at the southern end of the Y-to-Y corridor, the Yellowstone to Yukon corridor. And then the last connected population is right through where we live here between Montana, south of us, in Glacier National Park and the surrounding protected areas there, up through to Canada's Rocky Mountain Parks, Banff and Jasper, and those iconic parks there. And we're working, and grizzly bear are a keystone species or an indicator species. If grizzly bears are doing okay on the landscape, there's a pretty good chance that sort of everything down the food chain from them are doing okay as well. That's not always, a hard and fast rule, but it's a pretty good rule of thumb, let's say. And so we're working to protect and conserve landscapes at that scale, that we can keep grizzly bears across the landscape and even return grizzly bears to some areas, because it's not that grizzly bears don't want to hang out with humans and won't tolerate coexisting with humans. It's that humans don't tolerate coexisting with grizzly bears because we're afraid of them. They have teeth and claws, and they can cause damage and make people scared and afraid. And we tend to sort of shoot them or trap them and push them away if we see them in and around where we're doing the human thing. So we need to learn to coexist with these animals and be more tolerant of these animals, but we also need to learn to control the attractions, like the garbage, and the fruit trees that we don't harvest effectively, and other things that bring those animals into where we live. And so we are working, as I described, at all of those scales at the community level to engender a conservation ethic and engender, a care about sustainability and ecological, protection, ecological health. And then we're working at that larger scale, at the governance scale with regional governments and provincial governments and federal governments to protect animals, wide-ranging animals like grizzly bears, like caribou, who are critically endangered and disappearing off the landscape as we speak due to that forestry that I was talking about, the logging of old growth. So yeah, that's a very long-winded answer of a way to, try and let people understand that if we can do this here, if we can demonstrate that we can coexist with nature, we can make space for nature, and we can hold on to these iconic species on the landscape, then there's hope for restoring that where it's been lost in other places, or advocating for it to be, to do the same in other places. So yeah, I encourage people to take a look and reach out and get in touch through social media, through our website, and to donate, of course, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Casey, for joining us today. This was a wonderful conversation, and I learned so much, so I'm really glad. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity, Danielle. It's nice to meet you.
It was a pleasure to meet you too. And for everyone listening or watching us, thank you so much for staying with us for this more episode. And remember, if you enjoyed it, press subscribe on YouTube or on a podcast app, because that shows the algorithms that this is an important conversation and more people can learn about the importance of Wildsight. Check their page, help out if you can, engage with them in their social media, and help spread out the word. And bye. I see you in the next episode.